Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the great and powerful Break the Rules stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov at LevPo on Twitter. It is a great pleasure to be here with Christopher Balding, Senior Fellow of the Henry Jackson Society. And you were a professor at the HSBC School of Business in Shenzhen, China. And now you are a professor at in Vietnam. As far as I understand, you are an absolute expert on the economy of China and what is going on today with the world events as far as the United States, China, Russia. We are going to get into all of that and more. Once again, I'm asking everybody to subscribe, add a like, share this video with everybody you know, and become a patron. Patreon.com/breaktherules. You know it, you love it, and I guarantee you will not be disappointed with the kind of content Break the Rules comes out with. We bring everybody together. That is the mission of Break the Rules, and we are going to keep bringing people together. Anyway, can you tell us a little bit about why you went into China in the first place, became a professor there, what got you out of China, just the whole backstory? I'm very interested to start off.
Yeah, sure. This is actually, I think, an interesting story. To be perfectly frank, I never had any intention. I never at any point in my life set out to go to China. The true story was, and I'm not making this up, I'm giving you the shortened version here. My wife was at a job that with some absolutely psychopathic bosses. And so without telling her, I started sending her resume to headhunters. And so a headhunter called up, and she didn't know I was doing this. And so the headhunter started emailing me because I created a burner account and said, "Hey, we love your work. We have a client in Beijing that would love to hire you for a couple of months." And so I said, "Oh crap, I'm going to have to tell my wife what I did." And so I still remember to this day going and telling my wife, "Honey, I sent out your resume. There's a client that really wants to hire you. And did I mention it's in Beijing?" Okay, so that is the true story of the first time we ever ended up going to China. And to be honest, I mean, look, for all the criticism I level at the Chinese government, I absolutely love Asia. We've had a wonderful time in our experiences with China, lifelong friends, Chinese and otherwise. So I don't want anything I say to detract from that.
And also just want to shout out this wonderful comment by the ABC, Christopher Ballin. Call him Christopher Spalding.
I'm assuming that refers to General Spalding.
Wait, who is General Spalding?
Oh, he was. Where was that from? I forget.
He was a general that is also known as a decided China hawk as well.
Very interesting. Maybe I should also bring him on the show. But anyway, we are going to get to what is going on with China and Russia. But first,
we had a lot of extremes from the China opinion. We've had Lolgo, very much, Xi Jinping, greatest statesman of the 21st century. And we have now critics of China. Full disclosure, when I did my MA at Brock University in politics, one of my professors was actually Charles Burton, who's in Canada, the foremost China expert, who was actually there during the Cultural Revolution. So, but so he writes in the Globe and Mail a lot. But no, I'm curious to know from a business perspective. I guess that's what we're going to talk about. What led you to really, because there's a lot of opinion that is, especially online, that's very divergent. Some saying that, China, they're the best model ever, and they're way leagues ahead of the West. And then there's others that are saying that there's actually secret fissures within the Chinese economy that they can't hide anymore. So I don't know. I'm maybe that's a good way to get into the conversation. So what do you think of the overall structure of the current Chinese economy, especially under Xi Jinping?
Adding into that, also I'm curious why you left China as well. But maybe those two things factor into each other.
Maybe they relate to each other.
Yes,
maybe.
No, so actually, why I left China was is pretty unrelated. So I had been there, I think, 8.5 years. And basically, the short version again is that I had raised the issue of China asking foreign university publishers to censor their work on China and remove articles within China. And needless to say, that did not go over too well at the university, Peking University, that I worked for. And so basically, in a snap decision, I was told that my services were no longer needed. And this literally came like 2 days before I was scheduled to start teaching. So this came at basically at the last minute. And to be fair, I was perfectly honest. I was never asked to not say anything while I was there about the Chinese economy and stuff like that. I avoided the sensitive topics like let's say Tiananmen, Tibet, things like that. But when it came to things like the economy, I was never asked to refrain from saying anything. I probably was a little more restrained, but I never really held back on the economy. The state of the Chinese economy today, I think one of the key points is what is your reference point? And what I mean by that is if you actually look at, let's say, the Chinese economy next to its like peer economies, and just as a couple of reference points, countries like Mexico or Malaysia, Russia, Brazil, things like that would be relatively good peer economies because of their GDP per capita. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at. And if you look at it that way, I think the Chinese economy is quite clearly in showing enormous stress. And just as an example, the debt levels of the Chinese economy compared to, everyone says, well, we should compare the debt level of China compared to the US. That's actually, for multiple reasons, not a good comparison. It's better to compare the debt level of China to, say, what Russia or Mexico or those are. And by any standard that you would look at, if you look at it next to peer economies, China is wildly an extreme outlier on, for instance, indebtedness. If you look at it as to how much infrastructure has been built, things like that. Again, China is an extreme outlier. So if they didn't build any infrastructure for probably almost a decade or something like that, they'd still be far ahead. So basically, what has happened in a lot of ways is they have raced ahead and front-loaded a lot of that infrastructure, resulting in higher GDP growth. But they've also expanded their debt much, much faster. So that if they, that has basically brought forward a lot of that growth that would be spread out over the years, and they simply don't have, let's say, the non-input type of growth left. And what I'm without really making very fundamental changes to the economy. So I have no doubt that they're going to continue to build more apartments that don't need to be built and more bridges that go nowhere. But that is simply creating more and more problems. And so I think there's, look, it could last a long time. Make no mistake about it. I'm not predicting the downfall of China in 6 months. It's very likely to last quite a significant period of time. But there absolutely is enormous stresses in the economy.
And when it comes to the power structure with Xi Jinping kind of taking over, at least as it appears to an outsider like me, an imperial role, if we look at historical China, do you think that this top-down dictatorship that, again, it appears to me as an outsider in China, is something that's going to make it last? Or is this more of the sign that China's on its way out, specifically because it has this top-down dictatorship, as opposed to the kind of system beforehand where, capitalism was taken in, but it was, how did that phrase go? It was socialism with Chinese characteristics. But in that system, people were still relatively free in comparison to now. So I don't know.
You mean before, like the Politburo before Xi
Yeah, exactly.
rose to power. Yeah.
The comparison that I would make, and I take this, I borrow this example from my wife, who is an architect. is building materials. And building materials can be flexible and they can be very rigid. And so basically what you generally want is building materials that are both rigid and flexible. Okay. And so what happens is for instance, if you're building a concrete structure, they will put rebar in the concrete so that it can be both very strong and flexible, so that when there's an earthquake or something like that, the rigidity of the concrete doesn't start to crumble. It allows that concrete to flex without collapsing. Well, what's happening with Xi is that he's making it increasingly rigid and he's removing that flexibility. Okay, so what happens with that is it makes it increasingly rigid, but increasingly, and so that makes it very strong, but that also makes it increasingly prone to near instantaneous collapse. Okay, so put it this way: if you told me, if we were to jump forward in history, and you were to tell me in 6 months Xi doesn't wake up and he's suffered a heart attack, I could believe that is very plausible. If you tell me Xi Jinping is still ruling China in 20 years, yeah, I could very easily believe that. The problem is that whether it's in 6 months or in 20 years, there's going to be a transfer of power. And these types of things, these types of power structures do not lend themselves well to smooth, easy transitions of power. They do not lend themselves to economic transitions. Even if Xi stays in power and he says, hey, we need to change our economy, they do not lend themselves to those types of societal, economic, political evolutions that take place smoothly and easily.
So in a way, he's already stuck, you'd say. Like, even if he wanted to change the system, it's already there in this particular way.
Yes, he's already changed that system in a way. Yes, absolutely.
But now he can't undo that change. Now he's just stuck on doing that same thing that he's been doing all this time.
I think that's correct. Yes, and you know, just to give you as an example, there was a very famous episode, and the Chinese remember it very well. It occupies, let's say, not a major place in history, but in Chinese and how Westerners view it. But I guarantee you it's a lesson Chinese have learned well, and it's called the Thousand Flowers Bloom period. And this is where Mao went around telling everyone, yes, we want to change, we want to evolve, we want to do things differently. And so basically the idea was there were going to be all these ideas bloom. And so lots of Chinese came out and started criticizing Mao and, you know, the government and how China needed to change and all this kind of good stuff. And basically Mao then took all these people that, you know, put these ideas forward and said, these are the people we need to get rid of. And so basically, even if Xi did that at this point, I don't think anybody would believe him, as we can trust him that we're not going to be exiled as soon as we open our mouth.
But do you think that China isn't, which some have argued, my friend Joel Davis is one of them, is that China's in a better position to service their debt through massive public works and through a command economy than, say, America can with North America in general, because people don't know this, but Canada as well has massive personal debt. Do you think that they're in a better position to sort of command their own future relative to a sort of changing geopolitical landscape when it comes to the economy, and specifically as Western governments sort of take huge, hits on the nose, the Chinese can sort of stay afloat or stay at least solvent and sort of ride it out the way they did in the 90s with, the Asian debt crisis? Or do you think that has just gone and that maybe Xi has like overplayed his hand?
So basically, I think getting back to this idea of rigidity, I think it's actually just to give you a couple of ideas. So first of all, the Chinese household, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head for Canada, but the Chinese household is already, by any standard you use, one of the most indebted households in the world relative to household income. Okay, more than the United States, more than most of Europe. And I should say they pay significantly higher interest rates on those loans. Okay, so the Chinese household, the Chinese government. I mean, we could go on and on. The Chinese corporates. So I don't think you can necessarily say that the Chinese government or Chinese corporate or Chinese household is de facto in a better place just because. The other thing that I think is very important is when I hear arguments like this, I don't think they're necessarily accurate, and I'll just give you the simple reason is that China is still a very closed economy, and it's basically a dollarized economy. Okay, so just as an example, I don't know if you've seen these reports today that Saudi Arabia is negotiating.
Yes, you mentioned that. Yeah,
you saw that today. To
settle, they want to buy yuan or.
Well, basically, they're going to settle oil trades in RMB. Okay.
Okay. Now, yeah. Oh, Billy, that's going to be terrible. Oh, God.
So basically, there's two issues there. So first of all, it appears that their plan is to pay for some of the projects in Saudi Arabia for Chinese labor in that RMB, and then the rest is going to be converted into US dollars. Okay. Saudi Arabia has no interest in holding RMB. Okay, I mean, outside of China, you can't use RMB. No exporter is going to take RMB. I mean, you can't use it. It's not, banks even in Asia won't accept it outside of China. You can't use it to facilitate credit or things like that. So outside of China, RMB is effectively, funny money. And so the other thing is that because they haven't opened up, they basically it's basically a balloon that is just it's pressurized. And so the central bank, when, for instance, if they engaged on massive public works, that has to be absorbed 100% internally. And there's a lot more pressure on inflation and things like that if that takes place 100% internally. The U.S., I mean, to be honest, we have a lot more flexibility because, yes, that takes place. We're essentially dealing with the global economy when the Fed does that. There's a lot more international investor demand, things like that.
But do you think that there is a possibility, and some people are talking about it, and maybe Saudi Arabia is hedging their bets, that basically Chinese currency could potentially be used outside of China if they have this strategic alliance with, say, Russia, Iran, maybe Brazil, like basically the non-Western, or rather I should say non-NATO.
The JV team, basically.
Yeah, the JV. Oh, God.
Well, okay, so this is where we get into a little bit of financial architecture is so basically, you can go to almost any country in the world, and if you whip out a Benjamin, you can pay for something.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, no questions asked. If you bring RMB anywhere in the world, people are going to look at you like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? Okay. Mm-hmm. You can't do anything with that. So when we talk about this, I think it's very important to note what we're talking about is little more than basically a mathematical exercise. Okay. So that, and what I mean by that is this. So even if Saudi Arabia settles it in RMB, what they're basically going to do is they're basically going to say, okay, we're going to have an accounting exercise. We owe you, and I'm going to make up a number here. Let's assume we ship you 10 billion RMB of oil. Okay. You're building us something in Saudi Arabia. We owe you 1 billion RMB for that this month. Out of that 10 billion of oil we just sold you, take out 1 billion and convert the rest into dollars for us. That's what's going to happen. Okay. Because outside of China, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? You can't use it outside of, so they're going to basically buy what they need from China. And so basically it's just a mathematical exercise, for lack of a better term. And sanctions avoidance. I should say sanctions avoidance.
Yeah, that's...
Well,
that's
speaking of sanctions, I do want to get to the Russia part of this as well, since the title of this episode is China's Russia. So,
well, before that...
Yes. Okay, go on, Gio.
But do you think, like, theoretically that potentially it could change? Because people are talking about the US dollar being, weakened by certain actions. Or do you think that in the future, maybe... the Chinese currency, they could potentially, may not be the world currency, but become a rival currency, or it just doesn't work like that?
It doesn't work like that. And there's a very simple explanation. for the RMB to become a true right. So let's put it this way. China, if they wanted to, could snap their fingers and tomorrow have a rival currency. No questions asked. By economic size, by financial importance, absolutely. No questions asked.
Right.
Okay? There's a very simple explanation. Until the RMB can be freely exchanged and a global price set, it's never going to happen.
And Xi will never let that happen.
And until China lets that happen, which that is not going to happen in the foreseeable future, until that happens, because look, forget China for a second. How are Brazil and South Africa supposed to trade goods in RMB if China doesn't let RMB into the rest of the world and doesn't let that RMB trade at a free price?
Well, what would happen? What would happen if it did? Let's just pretend that China.
If there was like a reform movement, if there was another, what was the Russian equivalent? Perestroika, right?
Perestroika.
Yeah.
So what would happen is, first of all, the RMB would probably drop. Let's assume right now Beijing snapped their fingers and said the RMB is freely convertible. Chinese citizens and firms can do whatever they want with RMB and take it anywhere in the world. The RMB would immediately drop probably at least 50%.
Holy crap.
Okay.
Wow.
I mean, in the snap of a finger, it would drop probably beneath 10. I mean, maybe that's a little more than 50%, but I would say it would drop almost immediately to, at least 10. The other thing is that it would wreck the banks. It would wreck Chinese banks. Yeah. They would absolutely implode. Because basically Chinese citizens would now say, wait a minute, I can take my money anywhere I want in the world. I'm taking it out of a Chinese bank. Now, mind you, these are banks that are already on the edge of collapse. Okay. These are banks that are in terrible shape. The other thing is so in a lot of cities in China, the price to income ratio on real estate is, if you're low, it's upwards of probably 30. There are cities where it's upwards of 50.
It's insane. Yeah.
The price to income, the real estate prices in China would absolutely collapse. Okay. Because now people could think of it this way. Just to give you an idea, where I lived in Shenzhen, the apartment I was living in probably would have sold for about $2.5 million. Okay. It was 1,400 square feet or so, $2.5 million. Nothing special. This was not a luxury in the Ritz, anything, but $2.5 million. The people around me probably made, I would guess, $20,000 a year, maybe $30,000 a year if they were doing well. Okay. It doesn't make any sense. So what they would be doing is they say, I'm gonna sell my $2.5 million Shenzhen apartment. I'm going to drop $1 million to buy a nice house in America, and I'm going to stick 1.5 in the bank and relax. I'm retired. Okay. It absolutely wrecks the Chinese economy if they do that, and they know it.
Is there also, you'd say, a distrust of what's going to happen to the future of China from the Chinese people themselves? And how much does something like corruption factor into this? So as far as tying this into Russia, and I want to tie it into Russia in other ways as well, but if we're specifically speaking about the corruption here, I think one of the biggest reasons why the Russian, why they should probably change the Z into a letter L with how they're doing over there in Ukraine.
Oh, here we go, Lev. Here we go.
Anti-Russian
propaganda.
Russian propaganda is because the Russian government takes around 80% of the money that's supposed to go into the things like the military. They're robbing their own infrastructure dry. And what I'm curious is whether similar things have been going on in China and whether that is also something that makes the Chinese population lose faith. Because a lot of people, from what I understand, have been executed by the Chinese government for corruption, yet corruption is still happening. So something's weird here. Why aren't the executions working?
So what research has basically found, and what a lot of instinct told people, was, first of all, it was as much a political cleanse as it was an actual corruption crackdown. So that he did absolutely go after people that were, let's say, generally linked to his faction, but he also went a lot more after people that were linked to other factions. Okay. So the other thing is that corruption doesn't necessarily go away. They just get better at doing it. They figure out different ways to do it. Okay, so I think that is a very important thing. When you talk about like the Russian military, the stories of corruption in the Chinese military are absolutely legendary. Okay. Like there was a great story, and this actually made the news in China. There was a guy who started going around a Chinese province, and he didn't even work for the military, but he told people he did. And he started just basically saying, I'm accepting bribes to put people in at the officer level, okay, of the Chinese military. The guy made a few $1,000,000 before the Chinese authorities realized what this guy was up to. Okay. I mean, think about this. This guy just said, hey, I work for the Chinese military, and he made a few $1,000,000 before anybody caught on to the fact that he didn't actually work for the military. Okay. There's a couple of stories of generals that worked in HR, I should say. They didn't even work in like armaments and things like that. There was this general that worked in HR, and when they arrested him, he had a sizable Beijing apartment that was floor to ceiling cash except for his bed. Okay, and the urban legend is that they broke 25 cash counting machines just to count all the cash that was in his apartment. Okay. That was the urban legend.
But what I don't understand here is, and I would want Gio to speak on this as well right now, because I think the biggest frustration that's going on online, I think more than in the real world, is that people see Russia and China as well to a certain extent, although lesser extent, because I know they're like more. They seem to be more foreign.
There's only like a certain amount, Lev, of the online right that like are hardcore xenophiles.
Yes,
There's like the wholesome Chungus like camp up. I said his name. Logo wide, and then there's like certain white nationalists who are like, China has a base in red pill system.
Yes, but the idea still comes down to the whole base and red pill thing, where we're talking about there being favoritism towards Russia right now, despite the horrible things that the government is doing, specifically because it's seen as the antithesis of what is perceived to be this hegemonic United States Western culture. So I don't want to put any words in your mouth, Gio, but can you describe a little bit more in detail about why this side of the internet favors?
The case is a bit more to be made with Russia, because the Eurasian ideal at least is closer to like a more European, although I wouldn't say, like, there's a lot of people that are correct to point out that the Russians aren't exactly pro-European or pro-North American right-wing. I mean, obviously. But it's like, it's closer to be made that they have at least some interest in counterposing the sort of Anglo-American NATO world order than China. I mean, China, but then again, and now that Russia's being flung into the arms of China, it's very interesting. But the argument goes that essentially, this, again, we'd have to argue about another time about the war in general going on right now. But essentially, I mean, it's viewed as that Russia is the only power that is at least capable of putting a monkey wrench within the sort of global neoliberal world order, along with China. But then China brings its own complications and problems. I mean, there's only a few right wingers, I think, that will go out their way and say that, China is like, the archetype of the strongman. But I think as a whole, Russia is the more logical option. I mean, obviously, because now that there's sort of like a religious fervor against Russia, I mean, it's kind of cemented this notion that now domestic culture war politics is now grafted onto this war between Russia and Ukraine. So that's like, again, another impetus for people to almost instinctually go, well, I hate the NATO Anglo-American world order, therefore I'm going to support Russia. And but then there's a few people that, of course, say, Ukraine is filled with based Nazis and nationalists, so therefore we should support them. But that's very few and far between. The majority impulse is that if I'm a dissident in the West, either in the political right, especially in the right, or like, let's say, Red Scare, Glenn Greenwald, sort of like alt-left people, the impulse is that, despite all their flaws, at least Russia is a more honest power in the world than, say, the Anglo-Americans. So, yeah.
All right. Well, Chris, what do you think of that?
Yeah, so let me hit something. So there's this idea going around that this war has basically shoved China and Russia together, and I don't think that's really an accurate assessment. I think it's more like people realized how close these were, and it definitely pushed them together a little bit further. But I think it was like, I think it was like, the analogy I used the other day is this is like, you yelling at your daughter when she says that her roommate is really that has tattoos and a nose ring isn't really her roommate, it's her boyfriend, and you can't say that you yelling at them brought them closer together because they were secretly married 6 months ago. Okay, I mean, and to use a slightly different analogy is like, look, let's not beat around the bush. China and Russia have a lot of reasons to not like each other. Okay.
Oh yeah, tons. Yeah.
Okay, but this is like the Russian mob and the Italian mob teaming up, saying, "Wow, this sheriff is a real pain in our ass." So we may do some drug deals together, but we got a bigger problem right now, and we got to deal with this shit before we start fighting each other again. Okay.
But do you think it comes from there's still some resentment, at least to the older people within the Politburo, that the way that Russia sort of like abandoned them in the 70s? They're like, you know what, China, you're on your own, can't help you. Or is it more like, is it like their cultural differences, or what would be like the sort of shelling points that would push away China and Russia from each other?
Well, China's so on the negative side, I mean, look, China has tried to steal military hardware from Russia the same way they've tried to steal it from everybody. Okay. So, I mean, and Russia knows this. Okay. This is not a secret. China has openly talked about, reclaiming parts of Eastern Russia, like up near, north of.
Well, in Siberia, there was like a whole area that the Russian government gave to China for a period, I think, of 40 years, but it might as well have been given over forever. I don't remember what the exact area is.
Yeah, and China's talked about large parts of that coming back to China. Okay, so let's not gloss over it. At the same time, they both say we have a stronger interest in a bigger common enemy. I mean,
right.
Make absolutely no mistake about that. And this has been going on, and they've been coming much closer for some time. Now, if one of them stabs the other in the back at some point in the future, it's going to be no surprise. It's going to happen. Okay. But until that day comes, yes, they will be close. They will be close allies, and they will fight for each other, and they will fight Western democracy.
I just want to rewind a little bit here. Sorry, Gio. I just want to rewind a little bit here to the specific thing I was bringing up, because I do want to talk about the relationships between Russia and China. But before that, I just wanted to get like a general outlook here on the kind of world that people value. So, for example, yourself, Christopher, you've been in China. I know you've met a lot of wonderful people there, but at the same time, there are certain things about the government, like you said, like the corruption, the inflexibility, certain things in this top-down style government that you recognize as being detrimental. There are people who are in the West right now, several of whom I think are watching the show right now, saying like, "Oh, love it, shut up." And those people, they are the ones who, they're probably living, I don't know, some of them are living in the Middle East or whatever, some of them are living in the West, and they look towards these top-down dictatorial powers as being the cure for what they see as being this globalistic, homogenous liberalism that's so destructive. Just from a philosophical or whichever perspective, what is your personal view on that particular view towards life, as far as a wish to live under this dictatorship, which would, as they see it, take care of a lot of these problems?
So I think it's one of those things that the way that I thought about it when I was in China is there's absolutely a portion of the population in all these countries that I've been to that absolutely yearns to just, go about their lives without being told what to do. Okay, whether it was Iranian or Pakistani students that I had that said, "Man, I wish I could just go have a beer," and stuff like that. Okay, I mean, simple things that you and I take for granted, to be honest. Or whether it was Chinese students just wanting to do whatever they wanted to do on the internet, like playing video games. Okay, I mean, again, not even necessarily political stuff, just things that their government steps in and says, "No, you can't do that." I think there absolutely is a significant yearning for that type of freedom. I'll also say a lot of times when you talked about when you would talk to people, there was a significant portion of the population where it was like trying to describe 3 dimensions to somebody who lives in a 2-dimensional world. Okay, I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. It's like the color and richness of life that you can experience as compared to someone that has only ever lived in a 2-dimensional world, and their mind almost can't understand what it's like to live in a world like that. And that's why look, I absolutely make no apologies for saying things like, if you are a member of the PLA or a Chinese princeling, you probably, shouldn't be given a visa into the United States. I'll also say things like, I absolutely, believe firmly that America should be, continue to welcome immigrants with open arms, from countries like Ukraine and Hong Kong and places like that, because, that absolutely, I think, makes us better. I think it absolutely, it keeps us pushing forward. There's a reason a lot of those people that come over and such a high percentage of, unicorn startups, have the involvement of immigrants in some capacity. So I'm absolutely a fan of that type of that type of thinking.
Well, same thing was happening with the Russian immigrants. So, for example, with myself and my family coming to the United States, it is a similar situation where it's interesting that in the peanut gallery, people who are reactionary that have this view of, oh, the West is so degenerate, and the New World Order and Western civilization is rotten to the core, that despite this minority of people, if most people are asked where they would rather live, they would not go to Russia. They probably would not go to China.
Well, you don't know, Lev. They haven't been given the option to.
But they would definitely go to the United States. They would go to any Western power that's so despised by a lot of the people that have a lot of time on their hands to write. But this is a very important. This is a very important thing, because I'm trying to figure this out. What Christopher just said right now has to do with what the average people he's talked with in China long for and yearn for. From what I understand, there wasn't the reverse that I just pointed out that's happening online right now, where a lot of Western people...
That's why what's so amazing is if you look at the number of, let's say, princelings from China or children from Russian oligarchs, where are so many of them based? Where do so many of them have second passports? Okay, I mean,
London or New York, probably.
London, New York. It's places like places like that. There's a well-known writer for the South China Morning Post, and this is a firebrand, anti-American, anti-Canadian guy. China's taking over the world, all this kind of good stuff. He's spewing this nonsense. And where does he live? Canada. Okay.
But that's the demoralization tactic of the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese, they fund indigenous groups and so forth here in Canada, and they hide a lot of their assets in Canadian real estate. They totally destroyed our real estate market. So I'm no fan of the Chinese, but I think that I don't know. This seems like, okay, there's two sides that are sort of confusing the baubles of a system for the actuality of it. So you and Lev, like most liberals, they confuse sort of these tangential freedoms for the whole, ignoring the sort of deeply systemic problems with our sort of Western liberal system. But at the same time, I will say that a lot of reactionaries online who are cinephiles, they will look at the Chinese banning pornography and banning video games and banning various other degenerate forms of media, and they're like, oh, that's based and red-pilled. But then they're ignoring how you can't even enter your home without a rapid test. in 48 hours, and your life is controlled by a social.
No, but that's the excuse that you're talking about with China, which I agree with you on. Why do you excuse Russia? That's what I don't understand. Why do you excuse what they're doing?
Well, first of all, you said something in the beginning, Lev. You said that there's sort of corruption and people leaving. Listen, there is a massive purge going on, Lev, in Russia. Putin is purging his generals, putting them under house arrest. Putin is stopping the flow of currency outside of Russia. So they are, in fact, in my opinion, a better position than even China, because it seems that China keeps chopping heads off and just not working whatsoever, Lev, because so many people have hid their assets elsewhere. But so, Lev, what do you have to say to that? To Putler.
Well, let me put it to you this way. So, Gio, let me put it to you this way.
All right.
When you talk about so one of the things is they say, well, America has problems. Okay.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not about to say America or any Western place is faultless and all that kind of good stuff. But think of it this way: which problems would you rather have?
I don't know.
Which problems would you rather have? So first of all, you talk about, okay, let's take racism as the one people are talking about. Let me tell you, and I say this, and I can say this with 100% certainty: the racism that you will encounter in countries like China, it's not even close. It's not even close to how much better the racism that you might encounter in the United States is. Okay.
Oh yeah,
Hands
no
down.
doubt,
It's not
no
even
argument.
close.
Yeah,
okay?
That's very
so
true.
I'm not about to say that it's perfect. When you look at which problems you would rather have, I don't think I mean there's very few people I think where that would be much of a debate.
No, but I think that when it comes to North America, Western Europe, what I mean is sort of not just cultural degradation, of course, the demographic problems that we face is sort of but then China has their own demographic problems.
Yeah, well, just like China and just like Russia. I mean, you're describing things that all these countries are facing.
Okay, we'll give you that, Lev. Russia does face severe demographic problems, but unless Putin is
but what is Russia doing well? This is what I understand from this conversation. What is it about?
What do you mean? They're doing many things well.
Like what?
Just give it time. Give it time, Lev.
No, in all seriousness, what is Russia?
Trust the plan.
What is Russia doing well? We got to know.
Okay. What is Russia doing well? I think that they're willing to recognize the problems that they face more than our sort of rulership class in North America and in Western Europe. They're sort of this is why Putin is engaging in these actions, because he knows that he faces severe demographic problems in the future, and there will be a time where there probably won't be as much military age men in Russia,
and that's why he's stealing from his own country bigger than ever throughout the last 10 years. I don't understand the logic here.
Well, we're stealing from our own. Well,
okay, Chris, this is what I'm trying to figure out. Gio says we're doing the same thing. The United States is just the same as
thing. We're
Russia.
doing the same thing in a bigger level.
Bigger level.
It's not just a matter of just stealing for sort of like an oligarch stealing from the people. It's more of you have the political class within America in particular is essentially, not only do they hate their own population, but they're essentially giving up their own future for ideals that are incredibly culturally, politically, in my opinion, spiritually corrosive to any population, to any civilization. That's what we're dealing with. Russia, it's like this sort of, pissy corruption and oligarch stuff, but you can't really compare that.
Hold on. I got it.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
So you look at any Russian oligarch. Let's just, I don't know of one Russian oligarch that has clean money, for lack of a better term.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I mean, maybe there is, but I don't know of one where it's okay, there's clean money here. Okay. So here's the thing. So let's even take the Trumps or the Bidens. Okay. Just as obvious examples. The corruption amounts that we're talking about with those guys, with Russia or anything else that's rumored, is, it's pennies compared to the corruption that you're talking about out of China or Russia. It's literal pennies on the dollar. Okay, even if it's 100% true, it's pennies on the dollar compared to the corruption that you see out of Russia or China.
And also the way that people are actually living there. That's another big difference, Gio. Real quick. I just want to put this in there, okay? So
Geo-harassment in the chat.
Hashtag geo-harassment. So in the early 90s, when Putin made up this lie about him moonlighting as a taxi driver, what he was actually doing was running St. Petersburg, even though Sobchak was the mayor. He was the guy who was... Putin was the guy who was taking the aid money that all the governments were sending. Hold on. So Putin was taking all the money that the Western governments were sending into Russia as aid, and he was then using that money to purchase cocaine instead of using that to aid the Russians, which is why a lot of Russian people experienced starvation during the early 90s. And then he was using that cocaine money to finance all of his people. But when the economy hold on, let me finish. When the economy, hold on, please. When the economy finally started to, get up and running in the mid 90s to late 90s, that's when Putin started ascending the leadership ladder, and he was riding this high while the stealing was going on even more than ever. The people didn't really notice it as much during that time, though, because there were boom times. But now the people are starting to notice it a lot more. And this is the big difference, where despite however you would argue what the levels of corruption are in the United States and Western countries, the fact of the matter is the kind of corruption that goes on in Russia ends up affecting the average Russian person significantly, to the point that they can't get good health care, to the point that
this is my point.
They have outhouses in 80% of the, or however many percent of the villages there. They don't even have a running water or bathroom.
But this is my point. This is our disagreement, Lev.
All right.
Is that Martyr did a great podcast recently. Derek Cooper did a great podcast on this leading up to the Ukraine conflict. Is that our disagreement is that you think that Putin is like, all like the sort of, like the Austrian painter, and he stole from the people. And yeah, did he steal from the people? Of course. Yes. Not denying that. But I think that when you have Western NGOs, when you have heads of Western banks flying into Russia to loot everything clean, using selective oligarchs that some of them Putin got rid of, that were basically plundering the ex-Soviet economy, that were doing terrible deals and advising them in terrible capacity. Even people, he's like the number one neoliberal ghoul. You have Jeffrey Sachs even saying that what they did to Russia was a crime. And this is Jeffrey Sachs. This is like, you want to talk about neoliberalism. The problem is that you can't solely lay blame on Putin and his oligarchs and so forth.
Even though he was stealing during that time.
He was stealing, but at every single turn, it seemed that the West had one deal for everyone else in the Washington Consensus and another deal for Russia. And it went all the way up to 2008 with Georgia, when they put in the puppet, and all the way up to when they got rid of the guy in Ukraine. It's the same pattern over and over again. There's one deal for Russia. There's one deal for everybody else.
Before I would love for Chris to respond to that.
Chris, how about just Chris weigh in before you spew some more anti-Russian propaganda?
Real quick before Chris responds. A lot of the money that you're talking about that the Russian oligarchs stole from Russia.
He's a good guy. He is not a good man.
Where do you think that money went? That money went to Western banks. That money
went
to
Western
real estate.
It went right into Goldman Sachs. It went right into J.P. Morgan.
Yes, from the Russian oligarchs under Putin. Okay, Chris.
And also the Bank of London as well. That London London still has a huge part in the Russian, oligarchs going back and forth from,
Yeah, so that again, Putin still.
So basically what you're arguing for is that the Western banks, etc., shouldn't have facilitated what Russia did earlier. We should have cut them off 10 and 20 years ago. Okay.
No, not as.
That's what you have to. That's logically that's what you have to be arguing, because you're saying there was all this corruption and the Western banks were a part of it. So then yes, we basically should have done what we're doing now 10 years ago, 20 years ago. That's the only logical outcome.
What I mean is that I think during Yeltsin's reign of terror is that I know, Lev, I see the look on your face. I think that the problem is they were essentially facilitating. This is what I mean by corruption is like a construct, because it's corruption when everyone else does it, but when the West does it, when the West implodes economies from within by sending in certain NGOs and advisors, it's not corruption, it's foreign policy. That's what I'm saying. I think that they should have handled Russia in a more diplomatic and less, a less, let's say, evil way than what they did in the 90s, where they were just picking them clean. And the Chinese helped pick them clean as well, like obviously. And there was corruption within, and there was oligarchs and so forth. So I don't.
No, but just to be clear, it was the Russian oligarchs that were picking them clean. I don't understand why you're saying that the Western powers
at the behest of Western advisors.
Okay, so what you're saying is that at the behest of Western advisors, Putin was stealing money from Russia at the behest of Western.
Not Putin. This was before Putin.
What was before Putin? He was there from the start.
This is during Yeltsin, Lev.
This is what's confusing me about your statements. They make no sense. Putin was there from the early 90s. He was running all of this stuff. This is why it makes absolutely no sense.
His power wasn't cemented till like the very end of.
Not at all. His power was there from
the Chechen War.
No, not at all. His power was there from the very start. If we're talking about the money that was supposed to go to the aid to the Russians, ended up going to Putin, ended up going to his friends.
Exactly, you're a friend. It's not corruption; it's lobbying.
So Christopher, I don't know. Like, what do you make of this?
So look. First of all, I'm not about to say. So first of all, when you say Jeffrey Sachs said. So Jeffrey Sachs was the guy advising them. So if Jeffrey Sachs says, "Hey, the U.S. did a bad job," I mean, Jeffrey Sachs needs to look in the mirror. Number one.
No, okay? But he said that people, like when he went back to Washington to broker deals, that they were basically stonewalling him and they were like doing a lot of different tricks behind his back. That's what his contention was, if I recall.
But yeah. Jeffrey Sachs, so you talk about what the West was doing. Jeffrey Sachs was the guy that you should be yelling at. I mean, he was the guy that was doing all of this. I blame him as well,
obviously. Don't worry about it.
But he and the other guys were doing this. The other thing is like, look, everybody knew, even back in Yeltsin's day, it wasn't a country. It was basically a giant mob conglomerate.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody knew that from day one. I mean, that was apparent, basically very early on in Yeltsin's day. So, like, look, I'm not about to say could the West have done things a little bit better? Sure, absolutely. Can you blame the West for how Russia has turned out over, the past couple of decades? No, it's not. I mean, Russia and Putin and those guys have basically said, this is how we're setting up the country. This is how things are going to run, and that's how it's run. I mean,
and also if we're talking about this mob rule that not mob rule by the mob rather, that Christopher was talking about, who was in charge of that? The KGB. And Putin was part of the KGB at the time.
I mean, Jeffrey Sachs, he regretted his shock doctrine back when Naomi Klein was.
But the shock doctrine, did end up actually working out in the end because Russia's economy went up. No, why do you think Putin became so popular during that time? Because he was riding the high when the economy was finally getting to be good.
No, but that's the whole. But Lev, the whole point, again, as much as I hate Naomi Klein, which she's become, I think she was correct to assert that the shock doctrine, kind of like crack cocaine, will give you a temporary high, but as soon as those, bills come due, then everything just bam, just goes right downhill, Lev. And that's what happened in the early 2000s.
Look at what's happened. What's happened to Russia. Is all of the tech has gone into increasingly parasitic type tech, either military, security type of stuff.
Yeah.
The early types of tech that you had, because you had companies like Yandex and others, and those guys have basically fled the country. Okay, the guys that did that, they now run Telegram out of the UAE. Okay, they're like, we're not going back to Russia. I mean, I'm sure that they fly back sometimes. I mean, of course, but they're like, hey, we want to be tech entrepreneurs, and so this is the state of what we're seeing in Russia today is driven by Putin's decisions over time of how the economy is going to function.
Well, yeah, I like no argument there. I think that again, like. Even since the Soviet Union days, they've always had that blindness towards their military and towards other industries. I mean, that's true. But I mean, I'm not saying Putin is like this savior. He's Heil Putler. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
you were saying that. But anyway.
Wait, this is a great point. This is a great point by our good friend, is it PCS? No, sorry. Cyber Ninja Zero. Lev, Putin's a pet of the oligarchs. Also, Lev, Putin also had power and was the main mastermind the whole time. So which one is it, Lev?
I'll tell you.
Was Putin just a bitch of the oligarchs?
No, he was not. He was not a bitch of the oligarchs. He was the mastermind behind a lot of the goings on at the time. I never said he was a pet of the oligarchs at all. I never made that statement.
But you're saying that the oligarchs can do whatever they want.
Yes.
And they could just...
Yeah, because Putin doesn't give a crap. Putin lets the oligarchs do whatever they want so long as they don't threaten his power.
He's purging them, Lev. He's doing another purge.
Okay, Christopher, I'm sorry. Geo, I love you, but you live in a parallel universe. Because no, in all seriousness, because I don't understand it. You have somebody who has proven time and time again to rob the country blind, giving money to all of his friends throughout. What Christopher mentioned right now, all the people who actually made a good economy getting out of Russia as quickly as possible. So I bet that what would have happened after this economic whatever it was called, with these World Bank people, these people you all hate. What would have happened if the Russian government, headed up by Putin, did not steal way more than they were doing in the early 90s? I bet that Russia would have actually solidified into a pretty good economy. It would have been similar to countries like Lithuania and so on and so forth. And I don't think there would have been anything. I don't think there would have been any problems with trade. And in fact, I think that if that was the case, Ukraine would actually be much more favorable towards maybe even joining Russia if Russia showed itself to be the kind of place that you would want to do business in.
Well, half of Ukraine does. No, never mind. I'm not.
Anyway, let's go back to China. Yes, but I want to go back to China in relation to Russia. So there was a former spy named Yuri Shvets, who talked about how China prefers soft power. China doesn't really want to cause any trouble with any other nation. They prefer soft power. But do you think that there is something in terms of the war that's going on right now that may have been set up in a certain way by China for certain selfish purposes?
So the way that I would always phrase it is, I don't think it depends on what you mean by soft power. So like we typically think of soft power as, people, having McDonald's and watching an episode of Friends or something like that. And so they have a favorable opinion of the US. I don't think we can think of Chinese soft power in the same way. Okay. China gets soft power in a slightly different way. And the way that I would describe it is this. The son of the leader of a country gets invited to dinner, and the next day the leader of the country makes an announcement about how they've struck a deal with China. Now, what they don't tell you is that there were some hookers and a suitcase of cash or something like that at the dinner with the son of the ruler, but the son of the ruler puts in a good word for the about the Chinese conglomerate that is bidding on a deal or something like that. Okay. So China doesn't go in guns a-blazing, for lack of a better term. They don't go in and, smack you around, but they absolutely, let's say, pull strings behind the scenes to make sure that that happens. Okay. That what they want happens. And this is why, like, if you look at how they operate, this is why universities, whether it's in the West, whether it's in the US, the UK, places like that, this is why, lots of places get effectively CCP donations. If you look at the US, at universities, probably two of the most famous universities in the US that have China centers are basically funded by the CCP. Okay, I mean, how
my university had a China center, a cultural with a Confucius statue in the front. So
is that the Confucius Institute? Is that the ones we're talking about?
No. It's these are China centers at universities, and I don't want to get in trouble with the people at these are very famous universities that have a very well-known roster of professors that study China. And I don't want to get in trouble with them, so I'm not going to name the specific universities. But absolutely, they're basically funded by the CCP. And I can guarantee you they know it, and they absolutely change how they speak about China on account of it. Companies, the same way, okay? China basically has put companies, foreign companies that deal in China, on notice that you cannot just not say anything about China. You have to actively lobby your home government for favorable treatment for us, or we're going to harm you. Okay, so basically, every company that is doing business in China is turned into an agent for China. Okay, this is why I was told a story about a well-known multinational that was lobbying against the forced labor bill that ultimately passed the U.S. Congress. And this person asked, well, wait a minute, why are you lobbying against this bill? You don't even have a manufacturing center in China, or you don't even have a manufacturing center in Xinjiang. You don't even export this product to the U.S. Why do you have any interest in this bill? And they basically said, China told us if we don't lobby against this bill, they're going to make our life in China very, very difficult. Okay? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about this, soft power is, let's say it's more like mob protection money soft power. Okay, it's like you give us some money and there won't be problems for you.
But they don't want to show any hostilities as far as, well, other than the saber rattling with Taiwan at the moment. They're not the ones that are showing hostilities. It almost seems like Russia, kind of like with that picture that was posted in The Economist that I did the edit of with the worry bear meme and the Winnie the Pooh. It kind of seems like Russia is a pet of China's that they use to go out in certain places and expand a certain amount of territory. At least it appears that way, or appears that way to Yuri Shvets. Do you think that there is something that China, maybe not now with the whole thing being a shit show, but that China may have wanted to gain from Russia expanding its reach outwards towards Ukraine and possibly other areas? Does China benefit from this?
I think one of the most obvious things is giving China a very clear blueprint about how they need to plan to take Taiwan. And make no mistake about it, they are planning on taking Taiwan.
You think that's a certainty, like that they're actually going to take military action to...
So when I say military action, I think there are a range of military actions. It could be a naval blockade. It could be precipitating a crisis of some kind by ramming fishing boats. I think there's any number of things that it could be. But yes, absolutely. They are absolutely. I mean, they recently changed the language about this. For basically the final solution to the Taiwan problem for a new era.
Final solution.
Okay. So yes, absolutely. They are that. And so people that don't think that is a very real possibility, I think they're very poorly mistaken. That is absolutely a very real possibility.
So you live in America now, right?
Yes.
I'm curious though, because in Canada, it's sort of similar, but I'm wondering when it comes specifically to the sheer amount of politicians that have basically been bought off by the Chinese. I wonder specifically the ambiguity with the Republicans in particular, because we know that the Democrats for many years have been basically been bought off by China. But when it comes to Republicans, there are some who, maybe watch Tucker Carlson, who are more skeptical of the Chinese. But then there's others in the Republican Party who are like neocons and maybe pretend that they're against both China and now Russia. I mean, some of them are even more severely anti-Russian, like they think it's the Cold War again, like it's John Birch Society.
It is the Cold War again.
Well, Lev, please, enough that nonsense. But where do you see the Republicans in particular as they stand towards China? Are they more hostile to China now or less hostile? Because it seems that they still get money from China. I mean, some of them in particular,
and
especially.
Fang, can't forget Fang.
Oh yeah.
So the way I think of it is this these days is that the hard left and the hard right it's kind of like a circle, and the hard left and the hard right meet at this crazy juncture of the universe where they're not really against China or Russia. They're kind of like, it's American imperialism that is causing these problems with China.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I say that about Russia, not China. I'm different.
Okay.
I do not, as a Canadian, I do not trust the Chinese. We can get into that, but go ahead. I'm sorry, cut you off.
And I don't mean to pick on either side, because there's crazies on both sides. I mean, there truly are crazies on both sides when it comes to China and Russia. Yeah. I think that the primary difference with let's say the mainstream left and the mainstream right, and when it comes to foreign policy, I'm probably a little bit more on the right when it comes to foreign policy, to me, the way I would describe it is this. I think the left, the mainstream left and the mainstream right agree a lot on the problems that China and Russia present. Okay. Mm-hmm. I think where there's a significant difference is, I think is what I would call like either the methods or the costs that where they come into play. And what I mean by that is, the joke is that, the left is ready, willing, and able to start a hashtag campaign against China. Okay. The West, who's maybe, or the right, who is maybe, and I don't like this, I don't think this is necessarily a good descriptor, but maybe a little bit more isolationist, is much more willing to maybe put on tariffs and things like that to it. So I think the mainstream left and the mainstream right, where the real disagreement is what are the methods or the costs that you're willing for your policies to bear to be able to confront Russia or China. I mean, to be honest, I don't think anywhere in the United States, I don't think any party is saying let's go send troops to the Ukraine as an example. I don't think anyone that I've heard of really make that argument.
There are some, like, I mean, Lindsey Graham is like pretty close to that, actually. Like some of the rhetoric coming out of, like, the no-fly zone thing is interesting because people literally think that there's some, I don't know, going to be some kind of like dome that's totally neutral that's going to protect Ukraine. No, it's like that would essentially constitute a military intervention.
Well, there was an announcement recently made where if there's any incursion into, I believe, the area of Poland, then that's it. That would be then
Poland's a NATO country, right?
Yes, exactly. The trouble right there.
Yeah, that.
Yes,
I don't think.
But the other thing, I would equate this to, let's say, like the standard leftist SJW type that people on the right have been fighting against, where one of, I think, the truest and most important points that they made about these reactionary leftists is they said that if you apologize, you already lose. Every single time when it comes to the people that want to cancel you. And when it comes to a country like Russia, when it comes to a country that could say, if I go in here and you resist, then I'm just going to use my nukes, so, oh, you're weak, I'm just going to keep going, I'm going to keep going. I think it's the same mentality with the leftists, where if you bow down, if you let them get away with it, they're going to keep going and they're not going to stop. So that's why when it comes to solving the situation we're in right now, and I wish it gets solved as quickly as possible, the idea that a country that's already started to acquire territory, and you could even see it by the size as far as Chechnya, and then we have Georgia, and then we have these area, like it just keeps going more in terms of population.
It's because the West pushed. Never mind. Go ahead.
So I think there's two very interesting things. No, it's absolutely not because of the West. I mean, Putin has absolutely, and she has made it very clear for his part of the world that basically both of them see the fall of the Soviet Union as the cataclysmic event of the 20th century. And basically they each in their own way want to restore a utopian vision of basically either the Soviet Union or let's say 20th century and then the 19th century Chinese Empire, which maybe even, comprises parts of the South China Sea and things like that. Okay. And related territories. So I can tell you, this is why, like the Philippines and Vietnam and Malaysia, even though they may do business deals, they are absolutely on high alert to anything that China is doing. And so there's this, and this is what I think is so dangerous about it, is there is this almost messianic idea in these two guys' heads about what they're fighting for. It has no bearing on, people talk about like geopolitics or strategy or army strengths and all that kind of good stuff. And I'm like, that's who cares? That doesn't matter. And people look at me and say, what do you mean that doesn't matter? We got tanks and we got RP. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. I'm like, when you have this messianic idea in your head about what you're fighting for, it doesn't matter. You'll just throw more men. You'll throw more people at the problem. You'll wreck whatever you have to, because it's this utopian messianic idea in your head about what you're fighting for.
But do you think that now that, I mean, the West, we are in a period of incredible exhaustion because we think that our messianic idea from previous decades ago won, maybe it did, but do you think that politics going forward will be sort of what people like Lev's favorite philosopher from Russia calls the civilization state? That Xi definitely does have a middle kingdom idea of China, and who knows, maybe he will encourage into Vietnam, because despite them supporting them during the Vietnam War, I mean, the history between the Vietnamese and the Chinese, I mean, goes back forever, right? Centuries. But do you and the same with Russia, right? And same maybe the Middle East is ambiguous. I mean, there's
I don't think the Vietnamese like China very much.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, if China can take Taiwan, I mean, I say there's a greater argument actually to say that China is in a better position to take other territories than people think that Putin is going to. Yeah. As soon as he steamrolls Ukraine, he's going to go to Poland and Hungary and wherever. I think that there's more of an argument to be made that perhaps Xi Jinping wants to control. Well,
already in a way, I think Xi Jinping is controlling a lot of people's minds by the fact that people are talking about, oh, the West is doomed, the West is destroyed. I know, I keep noticing this ideological subversion everywhere in the reactionary right.
Yeah, but that's oh, come on, Lev.
No, it's part and parcel, I think, of China's strategy to delegitimize any power that the West has. Meanwhile, at least, I don't know, Christopher, about you, but what I'm seeing right now is kind of an inverse, where on one hand you had these commercials coming out of China and Russia showing, we have this manly army and we're very powerful, unlike these, Westerners. And what we're seeing right now is the opposite, that their army is crap and their people don't know what they're doing. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are doing great. So anyway, I don't want to get into that too much. No, but the point is that there is this ideological subversion. But to Gio's question, Christopher, do you see there being this multipolar world? And also, do you think that I am right in terms of seeing this ideological subversion happening in the U.S. from China?
So I think so let's put it this way. I don't think America has really woken up. I think it's waking up, but I don't think America has really woken up to the depth of, America likes to think that it almost lives in a postmodern society where ideas and, ideology are kind of a thing of the past.
Yeah.
And they really aren't. They really aren't. And to Xi and Putin, this is absolutely deeply ideological. It is. I mean, it is deeply about democracy versus non-democracy, and I don't think that's something that America has necessarily really woken up to. I think there's parts of it that have, but I think there's a lot that really hasn't, because I think a lot of Americans, and I would even say a lot of people that follow China, they view kind of Xi as playing in his sandbox and doing his China thing, and they don't really view that Xi has this vision of the world that he wants to execute, and how he wants the world to become basically like China. You have people that work in the Biden administration that basically made their name writing papers about how China was not really expansionist and it wasn't ideological, and we could work with them and things like that. And this is I think that a lot of the thinking that permeates a lot of the administration that is in power right now in the United States, and even a lot of people in influential positions.
But do you think that kind of thinking also stems from, I know I keep using the term ideological subversion, but again, as somebody who saw a lot of these, not personally saw, but read up on and understands the reasoning behind a lot of these subversions back in the 60s and 70s from the USSR, I can imagine there are similar things going on regarding China influencing pretty much, many people in power into having a certain thinking about China and a certain thinking about the United States.
I don't even think I think it's a lot more simple, because I think actually China's done a very good job of understanding what motivates individuals. And there's something that in China they call blue, green, yellow, and I forget what one of the colors stands for, but it's pretty simple. It's basically money and sex, money, power, and sex. Okay, and so look, there's a reason that individuals very closely linked to the CCP give money to universities. There's a reason that those individuals give money to think tanks. Okay, that's not an accident. Okay, there's a reason that that certain people are invited to give talks in China and stuff like that. Okay, I guarantee you. I mean, they literally have databases on people and how influential and all this other kind of good stuff that they are. That it's not an accident. Okay, and so a lot of times I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm not really influenced by China. I'm just going to argue that we shouldn't do anything to China. Okay, yes, China's bad. And so one of the things you will see is you'll see a lot of people point to, actually, I wrote a paper about human rights abuses in China. We shouldn't do anything yet because we should promote engagement. Dude, we've been promoting engagement for 20 years. What has changed? Actually, it's gotten significantly worse. Yes, but we should still promote engagement because they respect me. Well, great, guys. I mean, and so a lot of people, I don't even think, realize how, I've made the joke that if Putin really wanted to undermine America, he should tell all his oligarchs to give money to U.S. universities to go on MSNBC or Fox, okay?
Yeah, I think Putin picked the wrong target.
That is true.
I think Putin picked the wrong target when it comes to the American far right. But when it does come to...
Lev, let's get this clear right away.
All right.
That's a fiction of your imagination. I don't think that this argument that Putin is funding the American far right, that's like, well, I don't get any rubles in the mail, Lev.
I don't think he needs to fund it. I think it's been operating on its own for some time.
I think the problem is certain Western readers of that one, your favorite philosopher in Russia, think that he's Putin's boy and Putin cares about us. No, I'm under no illusion that Putin doesn't give a shit about American right-wingers.
No, it's not about giving a shit or not. It's more about implanting the idea that America is a failed state, that America's degenerate, that liberalism is wrong. That is the thing that's been implanted.
But can you not point to his recent speech, Empire of Lies, and pick out something that's wrong with what he said? In terms of America's own cultural fault lines and its decline until this is why I do break the rules in the first place, because a lot of the problems that you bring up and people in the chat bring up, these are important. Well, 1 second, these are important problems. And honestly, Christopher, I think that a lot of liberal-minded people in the United States, they don't pay attention to problems that a lot of people in the further reaches of the internet bring up, just because they don't interact with each other. Before Break the Rules, that is. Everybody subscribe. So this is why I think it's important to bring people together like that. But again, being somebody from Russia, I do notice that there is this amazing influence of seeing Putin and his empire as being something that it is not by people in the far right. And my question to you, and this isn't even about just Russia, but about China as well, do you think, Christopher, that there is something to be gained, or it's just a waste of time for countries like Russia and China to try to mimetically appeal to a lot of the more fringe elements of the internet? Is there something to be gained by that? Break the bigots. That's a good one.
So one of the things is that, just as an example, if you actually go back and look in 2016 about how much money Russia spent, all the money that they could find that Russia spent on stuff, actually it's a piss. It's like pissing in the ocean. I mean, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the way that I think, and I think there's been a lot of research, public, academic, various types of this. And here's how I've settled. And China does the same thing. It's not about choosing a side, okay? Because believe it or not, Putin spent money on pro-Hillary stuff, as well, too.
A lot of things as well.
And I should emphasize, I'm not saying Putin was backing Hillary. That's not the point. That's absolutely not the point. I don't want to get in trouble for saying Putin's backing this candidate or that candidate. It's not the point. Fuck. Okay? I'm just pointing out that there was money that, Russia spent, in pro-Hillary advertisements. And basically what the strategy is not to necessarily back a specific candidate, because I think Putin's smart enough to know, my Facebook ads are not going to swing the election. Okay, like I forget what it was. It was like 20,000. I think it was less than 50,000 or something like that. I forget the exact number, but it's a pretty small amount of number in the grand scheme of things. But what it's about is about sowing discord. It's about creating conflict. Okay, it's about making people doubt the system. Okay, and yes, before Putin, before Xi, there were questions and all this kind of good stuff. But the entire point of, I think, what Putin and Xi really do with their misinformation campaigns is to create conflict. Okay, and I think if and I think there's something to this idea that if you look at a lot of like these social divides have really bubbled to the surface a lot more as there's been so much additional information attempt given to trying to create by outside forces like Putin and Xi. Doesn't even matter what people are fighting about as long as they're fighting.
Yes.
Okay. And so that's why, myself, like, I don't want to say I would talk with, I think more than anything as Americans and, liberal, citizens of liberal countries and things like that, more than anything, a lot of us just need to sit down and have a beer together. Okay?
Exactly.
Whatever side you're on. Okay. Because I think that's their real strategy.
I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting. There was a comment over here saying from Big Fish. And by the way, guys, need those super chats as well. But Big Fish says, if you doubt the intelligence of Kamala Harris, you're a Putler apologist. So this is the other very fun thing that I've noticed, and I think you've noticed this too. When you see all these posts on Twitter about the Avengers, about Reddit, about all of these things that a lot of people, I think, kind of rightfully find to be cringe. They're taking these things and saying, oh, these people support these stupid superhero movies and they support Ukraine as well. These people support the, what was it called? The Transgender Story Hour, and they support Ukraine as well. How could you even think of supporting Ukraine if all of these people that you hate also support it? And I think that in a way, the cringeness of leftist, like a socially woke policy in the United States has been such a good ammunition for people on the other side. And I think it's been a great ammunition for people in Russia, because a lot of, let's say, common sense minded people, they recognize that something's wrong with a lot of these policies. But as a result, they keep just going to the other side of seeing fascism and having a dictatorship as being something that can remedy a lot of these situations. But I am kind of curious, though, when it comes to addressing these situations in the Western civilization that we currently have. And this is kind of going away from the subject, and I want to bring it back, but just your personal views, Chris. Do you think that this is something that we can learn to reckon with and create a kind of society where we're not going to live in the hellscape a lot of people on that side imagine? Because they imagine it being like this, live in the pods, eat the bugs, technocracy controlling everything, kind of system. If you say the wrong pronoun, then you're going to get arrested. Like, that is the kind of reality that they imagine is being brought about from having a Western hegemony. And this is why they look towards Russia and sometimes towards China as being kind of like the underdog fighting this overall technocracy.
So I think that one of the places I would start out with that question is I think we've gotten into this problem in and I see this a lot in the United States. I can't speak as much for other countries, but we define ourselves by not what my opinion is on a matter based upon whatever principles I think are right, but we define our opinion based upon what somebody else says. Okay, so if Tucker says it, I got to say the opposite. Or if MSNBC says it, I got to agree with it, or I got to say the opposite, okay, depending on where I stand. Rather than saying, I think this is the right thing and, the right idea, and I'm going to take that position regardless of if Kamala or Tucker agree with it, okay? This is my position. And so this is why you see such, it's just strikingly common these days that you will see people take a position that they took the exact opposite of 6 months ago, because now all of a sudden somebody agrees with it. Okay. A person that they follow or they agree with says, this is the position you should have. And they don't put it in those exact words. And so this, I think, and that rots people's brain primarily because it's a very corrosive form of tribalism, is what it is.
Well, I do see it. I do see it as being in more liberal or leftist people, where I do find them all of a sudden being in favor of of Ukraine defending itself, even though I really doubt that these people would have cared that much about Ukraine to begin with. But I do think that there is an influence that is affecting them to act that way. That being said, the idea that those people are the ones that, like the idea of Ukraine being defended, thus I, as being a based and red-pilled internet renegade, would go the opposite direction and be in favor of Russia, I think is just as ridiculous. But then the problem that I see is, when it comes to, again, and I wish Gio was here right now, I don't know where he is, but when it comes to the problem of the people who are on the reactionary right, I don't think their position has changed like the left has. I think that they are pretty solidified in what they believe and have believed for a long time when it comes to values like having a dictatorship, being able to judge what happens in society so that we don't have this bureaucratic glut, so that we don't have this technocratic state that ends up, and even when I say it, it's weird, because wouldn't a technocratic state that controls people be a dictatorship? So that's why I wish Gio was here, because I don't really understand what exactly is going on here. But do you see a way out for this? I mean, yes, talking together like we're doing here, that's one way of doing it. But as far as a lot of liberal-minded Americans addressing these problems head on, do you think it's already happening? Do you think people are starting to worry about things like tracking, China-style tracking, having a digital currency like some countries are planning, based on China, and also social credit scores, things like that? Like, do you see liberal-minded friends of yours, Christopher, being concerned about these things and concerned about a quasi-communist dictatorship in the United States?
So let's put it this way. I think it's going to, I think we're in a period of history, and I should say not just this exact moment with Ukraine and Russia and all this kind of good stuff. I think we're at a period of history, let's say plus or minus, going back a couple of years and, going a couple of years into the future, where a lot of things are happening which are going to determine the course of a much longer period of time. And, just as an example, what happened in Canada recently, where they were able to start freezing bank accounts with the truckers and stuff like that. And people said, wait a minute, these guys were, why did we need to invoke emergency powers for what amounted to a protest? Okay. I mean, there was no need for that. And all of a sudden there was this digital currency, and then they were seizing digital currencies. Look, I can tell you, Facebook or Google keeping data on me is fundamentally different than the Chinese government keeping data on me. Those are two fundamentally different things. Yes, Google keeps data on me, and we need to think about how to make sure that data is as secure as possible and things like that. I think we need to impose greater restrictions on any government access to data like that. But those are two fundamentally different things. But I think absolutely, I think a lot of people are saying, what is the level of control, especially coming out of Corona, that we should be able to give over to technocrats? Because look, I think if there was ever an advertisement against the technocratic class, it's been the CDC during Corona. The CDC during Corona has not performed well. I think even a lot of liberals at this point would agree with that assessment. And so I do think there is absolutely a rethinking of a lot of these issues. And if we're talking foreign policy, and I'll say something maybe mildly controversial here, one of the things that, think back almost a decade at this point, pre-Iraq War, is there was this thinking coming out of Russia in the 90s and everything like that, was that the United States had not been firm enough with dictatorships and had worked too closely with dictators and things like that. Okay, and so Condoleezza Rice and George Bush said, and again, this was even pre Iraq War, was we're not going to work. We're going to take a much tougher stance with allies, even with allies that are dictators. Even if they are allies, we're going to be tougher with them. We're not going to tolerate that. And so I think that is one of the great conundrums of foreign policy: is how do you work with countries that have a fundamentally different governance system, but you still maybe need to work with? And I don't think there's a good answer, but I do think we are maybe starting to say, we should be taking a tougher stance with countries like that.
I hope that would be the case. There are some comments over here that I think go deeper into what I see as the differentiation here. So Cyber Ninja Zero, a Middle Eastern listener of the show, says, Lev, a technocracy is a bureaucracy, while authoritarianism has more central node of control and doesn't allow the bloat of the techno regime. So the view that a lot of people, I think, in his corner have is that with the Western imperial liberty-minded group, you're going to have this out-of-control bureaucracy forming from a lot of these big tech corporations being in bed with government. While they imagine that if some leader comes out like I don't know, again, like I think they're looking at Putin as being an example of this Alexander the Great figure, which is absolutely the furthest thing from it. The guy's in a bunker somewhere right now. But anyway, they see a figure like that being a representation of a kind of leader that would love their own people and would make sure that harm does not come to their own people from the banking establishment, from the financial institutions. That is something that they see is missing today. I personally have a huge problem with the actual consequences in real life of what happens when a person like that comes in charge. But do you see what the difference here is between these two?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you, under the Trump administration, one of the foundations of the Trump administration, which didn't get much press, and to be honest, I don't know how much progress they made because it's very difficult. But basically, a lot of laws in America these days are written, I wouldn't say vaguely, but the legislation actually delegates significant amounts of authority to regulators to basically finalize the details. Okay. And so basically this is vested the bureaucracy in the American system of government with enormous amounts of power. And basically it makes it also legally, it makes it much more difficult to fight for many reasons. And so basically it's turning over an enormous amount of power to basically an unaccountable fourth branch of government, almost people which outlive the politicians and things like that. And so this is, I think, even in the Democratic Party, you're hearing grumblings about this in different ways. They may not have the same agreements or approach as the right does, but you're even hearing grumblings on the left about the bureaucratic state. So yes, absolutely. I think that's a completely valid concern.
But on the other side, what the proposition is, there was a comment right here which solidified it even more from Internet Friend. And once again, I'm going to read these, but again, super chats are always even more appreciated, which we will read in the end.
Look at these comments, Mike.
Yes, here we go. So, okay, Internet Friend says, a singular strong man who has disproportionate power is a man I can hold accountable, can approach to solve problems and get answers instead of put on hold. Redirected accountability can't be diluted.
100% agree.
So we'll basically look at how are you going to do that as the leader of a country? Okay, like she would be one of the closest examples we have to, and nobody can get near him. Okay, so like that in a modern governance system is unrealistic.
So what were you guys talking about when I left?
Well, just that right now, as far as the differences between having a bureaucratic, technocratic system that both Christopher and a lot of people who are more in the reactionary right are against, while at the same time comparing that to a dictatorial system that people like Cyber Ninja Zero, for instance, advocate for. And Chris just pointed out right now one problem there. The other problem that I would point out is what's currently, I think, going on with Putler is the propaganda that he himself instilled in Russian television is of such a nature that they make programs not for the audience in Russia, they make programs for Putin. And Putin watches those...
Gio, hold on. Is there not programs?
Gio, calm down. And the situation there now is that they put on the programs, Putin watches those programs, and he buys his own bullshit, basically. The kind of stuff that he's propagandizing, he's starting to believe himself when it actually comes to something like, we're going to go into Ukraine and they're going to greet us as liberators because it's full of Nazis and drug addicts.
There are many millennial and like lower Gen X tech people and journalists with laptop jobs that watch Euphoria and think that's what the average American person is. And well, it's the same thing, Lev. I don't know. There's most media in the West is actually made for the ruling class. It's not made for ordinary people.
But if they watch Euphoria, they're not going to go invade a country. That's, I think, a big difference. But,
well, they don't have to. Well,
okay, no, okay, but here's the thing. But do you think then that having, and this is for both of you gentlemen, do you think that having a dictator system, what would prevent something like that from happening to more people than just Putin? Where you put out propaganda. Well, hold on, we will, but hold on. When you put out propaganda, and you start believing in that propaganda because there's nobody to challenge you. Like, that is, I think, one of the biggest problems with the top-down structure, where you have yes men around you. There's not going to be anybody around you who's going to say anything that's going to be contrary to what you believe. And how is that a good system of governance? That's what I don't understand. So, Gio, make the case for it, and Christopher, I would love to hear what you think. So go for it, Gio.
Wait, Christopher, you go ahead. Then I don't understand
so
what I'm arguing
all I was
for.
All I was going to say was this is actually a very common process, even in the American presidency, where 3 to 4 years in their first term, or let's say in their 6th, 7th, 8th years, where they've assembled a trusted cadre of aides. And they even if they don't necessarily mean to, these are people that think very, very similarly. Okay, these are people that watch the same programs. These are people that have the same ideas, and so it ultimately becomes very bubble-like. Okay, and in fairness, this happens, in Democrats and it happens in Republicans. Okay, so I'm not trying to take sides there, and so this is actually a very corrosive idea. And the nice thing about democracies is, at the very least, in a democracy, we can get somebody from the different side or the same party to come in and have his own bubble of advisors. So at least we get a different bubble. Okay.
In Canada, it's very similar because the way it works is that it's different because, well, I mean, partially because we have no term limits, but it's like the way that it works in terms of the parliamentary system is that the machinery of the party itself is incredibly important compared to the way that a newer administration in America will pick and choose their cabinet. It really is very much party driven. Especially with the Liberal Party, because the machinery has been there forever. And so the machinery of that party almost dictates, even though technically the prime minister has more power than the American president, although with executive orders, that's kind of, not so much the case. But I think that it's very much, I would argue that in Canada, we have even more of an insular party political class than even in America. Because in America, you have, I think because the two-party system is so on its face, just a very limited order of things, you have like different factions that will break off. You have like people within the Republican Party who definitely are more like, let's call it the Tucker Carlson side instead of the Sean Hannity side, if you know what I mean. And in the Democrats, you have the AOC people, you have the older like Clintonites, Clintonistas, you have, that's the way it works. But what I wanted to ask you is that we were talking about before I left,
Oh no, but
go ahead, Lev.
I did want to just finish that point that
you
were bringing up
ask
here.
Me...
Well, no. Well, in relation to what you just said right now, which I think is important about Canada. So you wouldn't say that the Canadian government...
There's nothing important about Canada.
Okay, you wouldn't say that the Canadian government is the exact same or is worse than having a top-down dictatorship. There are still certain checks to power in Canada and the American system.
No, I wouldn't. Those checks are becoming very blurry and indivisible as time goes on.
So the dictator, the tin horn dictator in some foreign country somewhere in Africa or in the Middle East, they would have this. If they were in Canada, they would have the same leeway to do whatever they pleased in Canada as they would do in those countries. Is that what I'm getting?
It depends. It depends on the style of leadership, because you could say that, for example, Stephen Harper very much was a top-down figure within the Conservative Party because he had to be, because he was uniting different people. But Justin Trudeau is very much a puppet of the function and the sort of machinery of the party itself. Like, if you want to talk about Justin Trudeau, you have to talk about Butts, Carney, and especially Chrystia Freeland. So I don't get where you're living. I think, Lev, the problem is that when it comes specifically to Anglo-American Western quote-unquote democracies, is that there's a sophistication to the way things work. There's a sophistication in terms of how power is structured and how it's regulated. You don't necessarily need a dictator to sort of have an iron fist and to crush dissent and to enact policy on a whim. I would say that the way the American presidents have worked, at least since the Bush administration, even to the Reagan administration, it's been the case that basically they can do whatever way they want.
So meaning the outcome for the people on the ground for the average Joe is the
not
same.
Similar.
Christopher, before we move on, do you agree with that?
I would say that's probably generally accurate. Nothing major.
Steve Love, there you go.
Wait, hold on. Just so we're clear, in terms of the average tin horn dictatorship, the outcomes from the dictatorship being the same for the people as living in Canada or living in America.
Well, I can't speak to Canada. I do think
America,
what a lot of people don't understand is the level in the United States. So let's put it this way: the thing about the thing about a lot of governments is they are very, very, very process oriented. Okay, even in China, I think there's a that's how government works. There's a specific process. But one of the things is like, especially at the top layers, there is a deference to authority within a specific government. And within those more corrupt or authoritarian systems, there is a greater deference to authority. And in the United States, there's less of, and I think in democracies, there's less of that. And then also people have a greater influence on that, which, I mean, they just don't in authoritarian systems.
All right, there we go. So for all the people who were thinking that Christopher Balding is on the side of the dictators now, that is your answer right there.
No, he agreed that the outcome is like, I mean, I don't.
But they're all people. It's not a question of them not being people with their own interests. The question is, how do those interests affect people on the ground? And you said that they affect them in the same way as a tin-horn dictatorship would. And I would disagree with that notion for the reasons that Chris mentioned.
But anyways, Lev, this is just semantic games right now. I wanted to ask...
it's not semantics. What's semantic about it? This is I think this is one of the most important questions.
The problem is you're comparing apples to apricots, Lev. That's the problem.
Well, we're comparing political systems. So on one hand, you have a political system that you would prefer where somebody's on top and everybody else is on the bottom. And that's...
No, but what I'm saying, Lev, the problem, the main problem, I think, is that you're operating on the assumption, which I hate to say most liberals do, is that ideological systems in toto determine the course of a nation or the course of history, and that human ideals can, this Enlightenment bullshit about like the human ideals can transcend time, blah, blah, blah. The problem is that North America in general, and parts of Western Europe, the reason that their outcomes are different is because of a variety of historical, cultural, and geographic circumstances that have taken place. You can't really compare Russia, which has been on the cusp of two monumental civilizations, the East and the West, and the way that they've turned out in their history, and the way that the West has in America.
Okay, but again, we're trying to isolate the impact of governance, and I think it'd be very clear that governance systems do have significant impact on outcomes.
Right. But I'm saying that as time goes on, we're seeing maybe there isn't such a great of a difference as the metrics of success of a civilization are going down across the board in the quote unquote West, in North America in particular. I think that.
But it doesn't make much sense if we're talking about like a country like Russia versus Ukraine, for example. I mean, those are the countries right now that are at war, and you see a difference between one country and another country and how it's run.
Is there really that much of a difference, Lev? Is there really that much of a difference?
See, like this, I don't know. I don't even know what to say about that.
Ukraine is poorer than Russia. It's still run by oligarchs. It doesn't have these mythical Western freedoms that you like to
compared to what? I mean, this. All right, Chris. Here's the reason why I brought up, and I do want to move on soon. But just so you understand, the reason why I want to go back to China. Yes, I want to go back to China too. But just real quick, I just want to be on the record. The reason why I brought it up is because I think this is the most important question of all when it comes to a lot of these conversations we have. When it comes to people who want to be on the side of what they think would be the solution to a lot of the bureaucratic glut, a lot of the problems here in the West, and they don't see there being that much of a difference at all between the human outcome of the kind of governance that Russia has or China has and the kind of governance that, I don't know, the United States or Norway or Canada has. And just that by itself I find to be very bewildering, and that's why I keep going back to it.
Lev, you said Norway. Norway is not a comparable example.
Okay, fine. Forget Norway. Forget Norway.
Norway is a very comparable example. Norway is a very comparable example.
To America?
Not to America, but to Russia, absolutely. And the reason is simple. They have very, very similar economies. They have a lot of similarities, okay? So like, if you want to talk about how a governance system impacts things. So basically what Norway did is they set up a sovereign wealth fund, and then they literally pay out dividends to the entire populace out of the dividends from oil revenues and from the sovereign wealth fund. Okay. That is a very clear difference in how governance impacts outcomes for the people at all levels of society.
No, yeah, obviously, but yet I think that Russia probably has more systemic pressures on them demographically than even Norway. I mean, Norway doesn't have a lot of neighbors.
But whose fault is that?
Well.
Like all
but
these
again,
problems.
Norway is very comparable in the sense of so basically one of the things that is driving Russia's demographic issues are things like excess alcoholism, all kinds of these types of things, and these are things that they've actually spent significant social money in Norway to address these issues. Okay. So absolutely, governance absolutely impacts how these issues are played out, and what's done with the social product like oil.
Right, but I think what Lev is saying is that in terms of the ideological system of a society is what determines it. I'm saying that governance, it has a fair bit to do with the ideology of a civilization.
No, I wasn't talking about ideology. Ideology aside, I'm just talking about what is permitted and not permitted in the system based on the laws that it has and based on certain, let's say, unsaid agreements among the people who are running it as far as what they're able to get away with and not.
Right, but when it comes to places like Norway and to a lesser extent Russia, I mean, these... Lev, you don't want to admit it, but demographics has a huge place in the role of like why systems either succeed or fail. And North America doesn't have a lot of cultural or racial or demographic cohesion as Norway or Sweden or anywhere. I mean, that's the problem. I think you're comparing huge monostates filled with the sort of multicultural melting pot of North America.
I don't think that's the best example here at all, because if we're talking about Russia, which has imported a lot of people from the surrounding areas like Dagestan and so on,
Russian multiculturalism is different than the Canada model or the American model.
I'm not saying they're the same, but what I'm saying is that you have a population.
So Geo. So again, you're making your own argument, and here's why. Okay, all kinds of stuff shows that multicultural societies should have significantly more problems than monolithic, than let's say racially, ethnically unitary states. So basically, these multicultural melting pots, Canada, etc., the United States, are by every metric still doing significantly better than states like Russia.
But that's not because of their multicultural systems. The point that they're failing.
I'm not saying it is. They actually should be doing. They actually should be having a lot more stress, and it's still so. Like one of the issues with like Russia is part of the reason that there is, and again, lots of evidence about this. Is all this, like you talk about the demographics, is the demographics are not solely, but absolutely related to the issues of how is governance and things like that. When people feel that there's no hope and things like that, what do they do?
Yeah, that's my point. Yeah,
they start drinking, and that's a direct result of the governance.
But the only thing that I would add to that with the demographics, one quick thing I just want to add with the demographic, that hashtag geo-harassment with the demographics, is that there was a time when there was not as much of the immigration into Russia from the surrounding areas, and back then there were other troubles in terms of how the government was run. If we're talking about like the USSR, for example.
Yeah, I'm not justifying, like for example, when it comes specifically to Chechnya, I mean, Stalin basically almost near genocide in a lot of them. That's not an example I would use. I mean, I agree with you there, Lev. I mean, that's not. Russia is very unique in the Soviet Union being able to oppress their minorities for however.
No, but not even oppressing the minorities. I'm talking about oppressing the majorities. Like that's the other big issue here, where when you have a state like Russia with the amount of Russians that for a long time, both under the USSR, which was a superpower, let's not forget, who were starving to death on a regular basis, and people even had troubles in the big cities as well. And you compare that to a system where there's maybe just as many people living that has been able to create a kind of system where people can actually thrive. That, to me, signals that governance has a lot to do with that. Now, you could argue, and this is a way that we could actually bring this conversation back to China, that Russia, under the Golden Horde, I think that did something to a lot of the Russians, where on one hand there was the Golden Horde, and on the other hand you had people like Alexander Nevsky, who were kind of like the bosses that took the bribe money from the cities to pay the Golden Horde, and if you didn't have the money, he would burn your city down. That kind of mentality, I think, made a lot of Russians who were mostly serfs into this very dependent and very, I'd say, PTSD'd population, where they react in a very negative manner to any kind of frustration. I don't think they can handle it. And that is why, for example, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but that's why during the Decembrist Revolution, a lot of the Russian serfs that fought that and were jailed, a lot of them lost hope and died, while a lot of the nobility who had a good upbringing, who had, a family and people, community around them that were very supportive, they were able to withstand a lot of those stressors. And I think this is also one of the reasons why Russia is in the horrible state that it is in today, because a lot of the people are used to having this leader figure. And I don't know, Christopher, do you think that mentality is like this Eastern mentality, having been ruled over by the Mongols for a period of time, or do you think it's something else? Because a lot of the people who were, let's say, the intellectual class in Russia, they longed for the West. Pushkin longed for the West. He wanted to move to Paris. He did not want to even stay in Russia, so the emperor forced him to remain there. And I think that there was this westward look from the intellectuals and the poets and the artists. But I don't know, Christopher, do you see that mentality? How is this
relevant to what we were talking about?
I think it's extremely relevant, because it would explain the position Russia's in right now in terms of its populace. Yes.
So I think there's two things that I would point to. First of all, I think there is just a general preference for freedom. Okay. And whatever that means for you as an individual. Okay. And, different people, it's different things. In China, it could just be literally playing video games. You don't even care about, the Declaration of Independence and stuff. You're just pissed off because she, limits your video game time. Okay. For some people, it is literally just, they want, they don't like all the restrictions, societal and, other stuff like that. I knew a lot of CCP members that thought the whole thing was bullshit. Okay. But that's how you got ahead. I mean, that's how you get ahead. You got to join the mob. If you need to become a made man, if you want to get ahead. I think there is just, people want to go about their lives, in peace and freedom. And when I talk about freedom, I'm not even necessarily, again, talking about, highfalutin ideals and philosophers and all this kind of good stuff. It's literally just, I want to be able to get the job that I want to get and, be paid and, have a house and a wife. And that's the end of it.
No, but I think like what I wanted to ask about specifically, oh God, I forget, it was a long time ago.
No.
About China funding various in terms of like let me think. Anyways, to address your question about the sort of problems, or rather lack thereof, with multiculturalism, I think the problem is, when it comes to North America in particular, again, these historic circumstances and technology itself, and being the world's reserve currency, and basically destroying the opposition in World War II, has led to, I think, a temporary rose-colored picture of the North American multicultural experience. And as time goes on, I think we're starting to see fissures within that experience. And I think that we will slowly start to see that perhaps civilizations with at least some, maybe not racial, but certainly cultural and demographic cohesion, perhaps could be a rival model to what we think has been the norm of liberal world governance. But now I wanted to ask you this. There are people that say that Xi Jinping and people within his administration, that they've read the American political theorists, that they know about Westphalian liberalism. They know about sort of like American Republican ideal, like the Republic ideals, and that they are potentially using that in sort of like a weird, like fusion, if you will, of different ideals, from Maoism to Confucianism to even like American sort of like old school Westphalian liberalism. Now, do you think that's true? Do you think that, and there are people that have read the great American political thinkers within China, do you think that gives them an understanding or an edge against the West, and that they are perhaps enacting or fulfilling certain American political ideals even better than America? Or do you think that they really don't care, and that they'll just go along with, I guess you could say, the sort of Maoist consensus that has been there for decades and decades now?
I think if we've seen anything, it is how poorly Chinese leadership understands the United States. I mean, if we've seen anything, and to be honest, I think so. Basically, there's one thing that I would say China has done very well, and that is compromise a lot of people very, very, very well. When it comes to how they understand American politics and the American populace, I think it's actually surprising to me how poorly they understand it. And the reason I say this is that it's surprising to me how well they understand how to compromise people. I think that's probably the same the world over. You give them a suitcase of cash and a couple of hookers, and you can make a lot of friends very quickly in any country. But it is surprising to me how poorly they understand the American politics and why politicians do things and where their interests lie. I think that is actually surprising. If you just look at state media is, even the English language stuff is absolutely awful. I mean, they're not even trying. I mean, it's widely mocked, whether it's the internet songs that they try to make go viral and stuff like that. And so I think that's actually surprised me about how poorly they understand and try to get what they want out of America, even if you had the same objectives.
But for example, people are pointing to what's his name, Wang Huning, as a leading intellectual political theorist in China, who was attempting some kind of like weird fusion with American republicanism and Maoism and so forth. I wonder if they say that he's basically like the whisper of Xi Jinping, the way that people think Dugin is with Putin. I wonder if his influence will perhaps give a better understanding of American politics and political ideals than like, it's very interesting because a lot of people think that the Chinese have bested America, and that in fact, like, our political, like, Canada and America, our political classes are sort of like drooling short bus people compared to the Chinese. But it's very interesting. You're saying that they don't understand American ideals compared to like, it's very interesting. It seems that like people are almost steel manning the influence of Chinese ideals upon political life elsewhere.
So I mean, look, modern Chinese thinking is driven by a very romanticized historical version of China, where the best way to describe it is China is frequently translated. The word for China is frequently translated as Middle Kingdom. But as it was explained to me by a Chinese speaker, that doesn't mean middle as in the middle seat of a bus or something like that, where you have somebody on your left and somebody on your right. It's better translated as almost center, as in you are the sun and everybody revolves around you. Okay. And so that creates a very like almost selfish conception of how the world works, that people revolve around you. It's a very, very racial, something people don't understand is a very, very racial concept.
Yeah, the Han
how
supremacy.
The nation state and government works. And that is absolute. People don't understand the depth of that. That is absolutely vital to the entire concept of governance in China today.
But is there also a racial cast, as far as I recall somebody saying that some of the descendants who are within the CCP today are the descendants of Genghis Khan? Do you think that there is anything going on there with a longing for that kind of level of empire that existed back then? And are there still these kind of racial hierarchies in China with the Han? But then if they're the descendants of Genghis Khan who are Mongolians, how does that work? You see, like, I'm very confused when it comes to this.
I've never heard of the, let's say tracing lineage back to Genghis Khan. I mean, I'm not going to say that doesn't exist. I've never heard of it. I don't have any knowledge of it. There's absolutely like princeling status of, like, if you look at a lot of the senior leaders in China today, it's the same. They are the children or grandchildren, whatever, of the guys who were with Mao. Okay. There absolutely is in that sense. And I won't say all of them, but a lot of them, it's basically the same. It's basically the same families.
So can I read something? I don't know about that, Lev, too, because it seems that the Chinese going back to Genghis Khan, that would sort of be against the Han supremacy thesis. I don't know about that, Lev. But this is from Palladium magazine, which I will say, without ruffling too much feathers, because who knows, maybe we'll have some people on from Palladium in the future. They're probably, I'm not going to say anything, Lev. Let's just say I take them with a grain of salt a little bit. This is Wang Haoning wrote this book that our favorite man, Logo Tatlas, loves, called America Against America, where he marvels at homeless encampments in the streets of Washington, D.C., out-of-control drug crime in poor black neighborhoods in New York and San Francisco, corporations that seem to have fused themselves to and taken over responsibilities of government, kind of like in China. Eventually, he concludes that America faces an unstoppable undercurrent of crisis produced by its societal contradictions, including between rich and poor, white and black, Democrat and oligarchic powers, egalitarianism, class privilege, individual rights, and collective responsibilities. But while America can, he says, perceive that they are faced with intricate social and cultural problems, they tend to think of them as scientific and technological problems to be solved separately. This gets them nowhere, he argues, because their problems are in fact all intrinsically interlinked and have the same root cause, a radical nihilistic individualism at the heart of modern American liberalism. Now, I agree, and of course he has read Plato, Hegel, and Aristotle, but I will agree with him, but I don't think that China is any better in that regard. I mean, they have different problems, but in terms of the diagnosis, at least, I think that maybe China is aware of the systemic problems facing America, but whether or not China, but again, they have their own set of problems. So what do you think of his assessment of America?
I mean, look, there's homelessness, I think everybody in America, would be willing to just, cut San Francisco off and let it drift out into the ocean. I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot of debate about that. I mean, one of the things you have to think about, though, is that, even accounting for all the potential differences, a homeless in San Francisco receives more in goods and services and all this kind of good stuff than a significant portion of the Chinese population. This is just these are the facts. So yeah, the problems are there. The problem is not, and again, what he's basically complaining about are the concepts of freedom and the heterogeneous melting pot. I mean, that's what he's complaining about, is that people can, live in different places. The reason, just as an example, one of the reasons that there's what we know of as homelessness in the United States is there's a high degree of mental illness among the homelessness in the United States. The reason that a lot of mentally ill are even allowed on the streets is because, according to U.S. legislation, it's virtually impossible to involuntarily commit someone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the only way you can really involuntarily commit someone is if they are an immediate and direct physical threat to themselves or others. Okay. And
sometimes not even that is strong enough, especially in California.
And sometimes even that's not strong enough. So basically, that's the reason that a lot of this mental illness is even allowed on the streets. So again, there's absolutely a valid debate about, what level should we have for, being able to forcibly commit someone. But basically, his fundamental argument is about the entire nature of freedom.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, that is the argument that a lot of the people, again, going back to the thing we keep talking about, present as being the big problem.
I don't think again, I think the problems that with reactionaries is that are pro-China is that they see again these baubles of they're resisting American liberalism and they have bans on degenerate Western media, but at the same time, I mean, do you want to live in a society where your social credit score is going to be determined by the same people that rule our lives now in America.
But the problem is that problem is that if you take China out of the equation, what you're still left with is people who don't like American liberalism. And my question to you is, what is the alternative that you want?
But I'm saying the Chinese system isn't a good alternative.
I agree. Well, that's why I'm saying let's get rid of the Chinese system. But what is the best alternative? This is what we are. If we don't want to be ruled by China, if we don't want the social credit score, then what are you bringing to the table? What do you want us to have? This is my confusion. I mean, not you, Geo, just like as Geo, but in general, the egregore. Like the people who talk about the problems of liberalism.
Yeah, again, that's
why. Look, this is why whenever I hear these complaints about the U.S. or everything like that, look, I've been to a lot of countries. I've spent a lot of time in a lot of places, and I can tell you, just about every country in the world would swap their problems for the U.S. problems. Okay, I mean, I'm not about to say the U.S. is perfect. Just about every country in the world, with the exception of Switzerland, Norway, and a couple places like that, would swap their problems for the U.S. problems.
Well, if I can make a case for Geo's side, the only thing that I would say is that since America is a country where it has so little problems, and people do have a lot of relative little problems, and people have so much creature comforts. People get into this malaise of thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to reach for? Because a lot of people, I think one of the biggest problems is that a lot of people, they don't have that much to reach for. And even with relationships, a lot of people are thinking, why am I going to get into this relationship? There's no way that I could prove myself as a man, as somebody who would bring home the bacon, so to speak. There doesn't seem to be anything in this life where what I do is going to have as much of a significant effect upon, my family and the culture that's around me. It feels like people are missing out. That, I think, is the malaise that, at least in the more right circles, like the left people have other things, but that's the malaise. So before we get to the super chats and finish this off, and also I want to ask you about the future, and that'll be the final question, but before that, anything you would like to add as far as how can we get out of this particular malaise of a lot of people not seeing any goal for them to strive for, anything that's bigger than, as they see it, just this bread and circus entertainment life that they're in right now?
Part of that, I think, gets to much more existential stuff. Just in general politics, I think one of the things is that there's this sense among, I think, the electorate in a lot of countries, I don't think it's just the US, that they're not being listened to. And I think, I think one of the problems is that every US president enters office thinking of themselves these days as they need to be transformational. Nobody wants Joe Biden to be transformational except, AOC. Okay. There's very few people that want Joe Biden to be transformational. There's very few people that wanted Donald Trump to be transformational. Okay. I think one of the things is if I've said this jokingly, I don't care if it's a Republican, a Democrat, or a Harvard MBA that said, I'm going to run for president. And the only thing I'm going to focus on is I'm not going to pass any new legislation. I'm just going to focus on making what the government does better. Okay. I'm going to focus on making it run more efficiently to better serve the people. I mean, we talk about the administrative state. I've heard some people say things like, we're at that state in the administrative state where we need to pass a law that says for every one new page you stick in regulations, you take out two, okay, or you take out one, okay. Maybe it's some ratio of 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, something like that. But I think so a lot of times so what happens is a lot of politicians, look, if you look at a lot of the policies between Biden and Trump, there's actually, in many ways, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of similarities. They might go about it differently stylistically. And yes, there are absolutely differences like Iran and other things like that. But there's also a lot of similarity. And so what happens is the politicians are really fighting about issues that are almost marginal. Okay, they're not fighting about issues that a lot of people really, really get down to, really focus on. And so I think if politicians said we're going to focus on this, I think that would engender a lot of a lot more support.
But beyond the policies, though, something that the chat is pointing out right now, which I think is important, is the spiritual aspect, where I don't think a policy, although they may think that a government policy would do something about it, the things they're bringing up has to do with, for example, let's see over here, government has to have spiritual grounding. So there's that quote that's often on 4chan, that tradition is not... How does it go? Tradition is not the worship of ashes. It is the preservation
of a flame.
Yeah, preservation of fire. And I think that there is something to the idea of preserving a kind of fire of something that's bigger than yourself in the world. And people feel very disconnected from it. This is why they go into these particular bubbles where they're all self-reinforced as far as their worldview, and why they fall for people like Putin or China or whatever. So my final question here is regarding that is, how do we get out of that? Can we get out of that? Or spiritually speaking, are we just doomed in being like these disconnected vessels that are trying to get some semblance of a community by speaking together, some successful and some not successful?
I mean, I've often thought, America, having lived in Asia for a long time, I hear the problems Americans complain about, and I just think to myself a lot of the time, it sounds like complete bullshit. I mean, a lot of what I hear Americans complain about strikes me as, you need a therapist's couch, not a TV show on Fox or MSNBC. And I think, I'll be honest in saying, I don't necessarily know how to solve the let's say social spiritual issues you're talking about, but I absolutely think that they are completely valid, because I think a lot of people don't feel that they have meaning in their life. I mean, I think if you're looking at, the Great Resignation as it's being talked about, with what's going on, I think a lot of that stems from people saying, what am I really doing with my life? Like, what is bringing meaning to my life? I think that's something that a lot of people are, struggling with, is that they feel that there is this lack of meaning in what they're doing. And I think not having a sense of hope. One thing that I will say about Asia, that I loved about Asia, and it was true of China, it was true of Vietnam and other countries, and for very different reasons. It's had very different manifestations. But you always felt that people had a sense of hope that the future was going to be better. Now, what's amazing to me is, I think in a lot of the West, is I feel that in a lot of the West, people's situations are fundamentally better now, and are probably going to be better into the future than most people's in Asia's. But for whatever reason, there was this sense in a lot of Asia, China, Vietnam, that there was hope for the future. And for whatever reason, I don't have nearly that same sense of hope or optimism about the future. And I do think it gets to those issues that you're talking about. I don't have a real good answer for you about what to do, but I do absolutely think that is a fundamental problem. Yes.
And this is a problem that hopefully, by speaking and by bringing in professionals such as yourself, together with people who are more anonymous people who are on the internet with the anime avatars, all together in one room, I think a lot of magic can happen from that. All I can ask from the audience is that you guys keep an open mind and try to see things from a different perspective. I know you say, well, Lev, you should see things from a different perspective. I already did, and I went through that, and now I see and now I see the light.
Very, very thin
look at this. Look at this light. Different. Look at this light that's on me from the sunset right now. I'm covered in it, in this light. Anyway, okay, super chats, and then we're done. Great conversation. So, super chat from Based R Word. I don't even know what the YouTube algorithm anymore. I don't want to risk it. $5. Okay, Based Retard. $5 through super chat. Z is just competent enough to play the Imperial game outside the Westphalian borders game. Northern Myanmar is now China, and who cares what a map says? Any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's absolutely. The PLA is absolutely big into drug and arms running down there. So, the PLA is moving drugs. If you talk about fentanyl in the U.S. and stuff like that, that's absolutely helping. That's absolutely being facilitated by PLA colonels and things like that. So, absolutely. What he's talking about, I think, is very accurate. Yes.
Next super chat, I think this is the final one, unless anybody's going to sneak another super chat from Zach, 10 pounds. Are we safer today than we were when the Soviet Union existed? I think not. We need Russia whether we like it or not, and by undermining them, we haven't a hope at tackling global issues.
I think, if Russia was to make a big move, let's say, some type of nuclear attack somewhere, I think you would absolutely have to assume that was coordinated or at least discussed with China before the event. Would absolutely be my default position. And on that, I think Beijing realizes that they have much too much to lose to being involved in something like that. And so I think in that sense, Beijing would definitely act as a stabilizing force.
And those are all the super chats. The final question that I have for you, Christopher, is any thoughts on, based on what you've seen already, what is going to be happening with Russia, Ukraine, and China going forward? Like, the furthest you can make a prediction.
Honestly, to be honest, right now, I think we're in a period of very real change, and making predictions at this exact moment, it's kind of like everything has been tossed out off the blanket into the air. And look, I think it's unlikely. I think it's very unlikely, but is it possible that China reevaluates things and says, wait a minute, we don't necessarily want to ally ourselves with these Russian guys quite so much? Yeah, that's possible. I don't think it's likely, I don't think it's likely.
No, it's not likely.
Is it possible? Is it possible that Germany says, "Hey, we're actually so worried about Russia, we're going to spend 2.5%, and we're going to buy all the F-35 jets that the U.S. will sell us"? Yeah, I think that's the most likely. Is it also possible that Germany in 6 months says, you know what? Hey, the whole Ukraine thing is past. We're going back to normal. Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, I think so. I think we're at one of those very strange periods in history where making predictions much more than a few hours in advance is very dangerous proposition.
It's very much the beginning of 2020 in some ways, where there's that period of indeterminacy where it's like anything. It's like a time warp where like the ontological machine can come about and anything can go. Like the week after 9/11, the first weeks of the Chinese delicacy. I don't know if YouTube will ban you now for saying the word, but it very much has that flavor to it. Despite what Lev believes by reading the Kiev Independent, I think that there will be a decisive military victory for Putler, and he will crush all resistance. He will go all the way to the west. But whether he wants to,
that a guest we're gonna have right now. He's under siege in Ukraine now. You should tell him that when he comes in. He'll love it.
Lev, you mean who I'm thinking of?
Well, no, the Polish journalist who was going to be on.
I thought you meant someone with insight like Coach Red Pill. But no, I think that I think it will be. Unfortunately, I don't know if Putin wants to avoid a situation where he did with Grozny in particular in the 90s or early 2000s.
He got his ass handed to him in Grozny.
No, he didn't. He took Grozny. He defeated a lot of the militants, but unfortunately...
He took Grozny after defeating the entire
After Grozny
city.
Was totally blown apart.
Yes,
totally
exactly.
Blown apart.
What a wonderful military victory.
You didn't let me finish that. What I meant is that he had immense trouble keeping it because of the Chechen militants and their voracious nature of fighting. I think he wants to avoid that situation where he's going to have to constantly deal with the Ukrainian insurgency. So who knows if he just wants to take a certain portion of Ukraine. I don't know what's going to happen. It's whether I think their strategy was to contain certain areas of Ukraine, but who knows now? Everything's up in the air.
I can tell you point blank, they believed going in that they would conquer all of Ukraine in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Period. Like that was their expectation. That was their plan.
Yeah, but just because they haven't done it in 2 weeks, I mean, come on. I
Two more weeks.
Oh, shut up.
They're going to flatten the curve in 2 weeks, okay?
I think that there will be a decisive military W for Russia. But what happens after that is yet to be determined.
They're recruiting Syrians right now. They didn't even. What are they even
they
working
haven't
with?
even sent in the GRU Spetsnaz, Lev. They haven't sent in their A team. They haven't sent in their career soldiers yet. Wait until they send them in. Wait until they send the Spetsnaz.
Yeah, wait. This is all cope.
Well, so basically, what you're talking about is not a decisive military victory. This is like, it's going down to the wire. Now, look, I tend to agree with you. I think you still have to consider Russia the favorite. But at this point, I mean, basically, he's going to have to recreate throughout basically all of Ukraine, Grozny. I mean, that's basically what he's going to have to do.
Yeah.
That's not decisive.
That's true.
And speaking of the word,
consider that a military victory.
And speaking of the word Grozny, in Russian, the word Grozny means like fierce. And I think this is, despite all the Redditors and all that propaganda you guys are reading up over there, I think that the Ukrainians have shown themselves to be some of the fiercest warriors of all when it comes
compared to the Chechens, Lev. Come on.
Yes, no, but the Chechens have been spoiled by Louis Vuitton and all these fashionista brands. If you look at the,
you can't compare Lev. You can't compare the average Chechen to the high command that works for
the Chechens are like Sarah Jessica Parker now. It's pathetic.
Oh my God. Are you kidding me? Some of the fiercest Caucasus warriors in human history.
Gio, this is your yes, because this is your problem, Gio. You've been
managed to fight off the Russians for how long, Lev?
Yeah, that was then, and this is now. Okay, they've changed.
Oh,
And
Bring
this
on
perception, and again, there's this perception that the people that you see in these rough and tough commercials, like, oh, we are the fierce Russian strong soldiers, that they're the ones that are, it's all pathetic, man. It's all an illusion. It's all Maya.
I will agree, Lev. Yeah, the neo-Nazi Azov battalion, they are good fighters. They're one of the only capable divisions that the Ukrainians have. I will give that to you, Lev.
That just like when we're talking about Bandera and people like that, both the Jewish people and the Russians who are in Ukraine, all these people, they've set all those things aside because they have other values. And let me ask you one final question. Let me ask you one final question about this, Geo.
You have to torture. You're anti-Russian. Your self-hating Russophobia is so severe,
including the native Russians. Including the native Russians that are Ukrainian citizens that are fighting against the Russian government, including them. I'm on their side.
Yeah.
No. Well, one final question though. Being a Nazi, last time I checked, requires you to want to exterminate a certain race. So which race do the Ukrainian Nazis want to exterminate? If they're made up of Jews, Russians, Ukrainians, who do they want to exterminate? So where's the Nazism?
Listen, I don't want to pull a cultured thug on you, Lev, but that's not really like the sum total condition of National Socialism. That's not like, they still hate like these identifiable groups. It doesn't matter that they're taking money from them. In fact, that's probably strengthening the case.
No, but how do they express the hate? What are they doing to express this hate?
Well, I mean, they enacted pretty much almost close by any other name, a genocide against the Russians in Donbass and Lugansk.
What the fuck are you talking about? Again, Gio, this is propaganda.
Years, there's been mass killings of civilians.
This is a lie. No, this is a lie. What's been happening is that the Russian government was sending in agent provocateurs into Donbass, which caused the government to...
conversation after, Lev, when Chris has to go...
No, I gotta go eat. I gotta go eat after this.
1-on-1 right now, Lev.
It's over. It's over. I've said my piece. Agent provocateurs went into Donbass.
You're saying now the Chechens aren't the fiercest warriors in all of the Caucasus. I can't believe you.
No, they're not. Okay. All right, we are done with the stream. I want to thank Christopher so much for being a part of this experience. And Christopher, I would love for you to come back anytime. You are welcome on Break the Rules. Yes, thank you so much for coming in. And is there anything you would like to promote? Is there anything?
No, I'm good for now, guys. This was fun.
Excellent.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much for coming in. Oh, and where could we find you if we want to find Christopher Balding?
I have two websites. Let's say baldingsworld.com, and then a recent project I've started, newkitedata.com, where we're basically doing let's just say interesting data out of China.
Excellent. So guys, please follow both of those sites. I'm putting them in the chat right now. And that's it. Once again, everybody subscribe and add a like. I got to keep reminding everybody here, please add likes. When you add likes, it helps the algorithm out, the YouTube algorithm. And last but not least, patreon.com/breaktherules. Become a patron today. And as you know, Gio, we've been doing Patreon-only streams. We had Father Emmanuel McCarthy on. That was a fantastic stream.
Oh, yeah. What's going on this Thursday, Lev?
Okay.
The Homesteader stream?
Yeah, well, this Thursday, we're going to be specifically talking about the U.S. economy in light of what's going on right now, having the Homesteader boys in here as well. So Apex is joining us, and Bastiat is also joining us for that one. So it's going to be more...
Oh, no. Please,
okay.
No.
All right.
Christopher, I feel like taking a shower.
Christopher, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful night, everybody. I am ending this thing right now. Take care. Oh, wait. I missed Tuxus Sneed. I have to say Tuxus Sneed. It's very important. Tux is a great contributor. $5. This is the new kind of This new kind of Marxism is destroying our cohesion way more than multiculturalism, IMO. There we go.
A new kind of Marxism. I don't know about that.
Well, I guess the cultural kind. All right. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.